Hello, this is Renee, and Tom and I are on the Ultimate World Cruise, and we just docked in Southampton, England. Today we're going to explore the historic city of Winchester and Salisbury. But first on my list is to meet up with Beth Ann, who's sharing our adventure on TikTok, and she came in to meet the ship. It was amazing to finally meet her in person. Tom and I then hopped on a bus and took a 10-minute ride to Winchester.
Looking at is an archaeological site that could do with a bit of weeding. Once you analyse it, tells us that Winchester, certainly 1,000 years ago, was one of the most important cities, not just in Britain and England, but in Europe. At one time, when the Normans arrived, Winchester was the biggest ecclesiastical centre in Europe. It was huge, and this building, it was a large abbey, but this is the female abbey. This is called Nunnaminster, and it was an abbey, it was a convent for nuns. This building was one of the biggest in England. Now, at the moment, you will hear the name of our most infamous king, Henry VIII, on several occasions. He changed everything about England when he wanted to divorce his Catholic wife, Catherine of Aragon. And in order to do that, he wrote to the Pope, said, "Please may I annul the marriage?" The Pope said no. King Henry VIII took the Brexit view. If Europe won't have me, then I won't have Europe. I will form the Church of England. It will be independent. I will be in charge. I can then divorce my wife and marry Anne Boleyn. A third of England was up for sale by the late 1530s. Including this building, it became royal property. It's now city property because his daughter, Queen Mary, known as Bloody Mary, wanted to return England to being Catholic, and she married Philip of Spain. They couldn't get married in London because it was too controversial, so they got married in Winchester, and at that point she gave royal land, this, to the city. So it's now the home of the Guildhall. And you can see this swing back and fro between religion, state and religion just on this one site.
We continued our walk on the water vole trail. The water vole is an endangered species in the UK.
And this is the final remains of one tiny corner of the Roman walls. The truth is, we're going to be walking along the walls in a moment, and a substantial amount of what we see will be Roman. But you can see the Roman city is very, very organised. The Romans were brilliant engineers. They did everything in a logical and a very defined way. When they came here, this river, the River Itchen, covered most of the flat area of what is now central Winchester. It was a very boggy site indeed. Jane Austen, the great novelist, this is where she died. But let's take a moment. We are now on church land. The word, that means that this land is completely run by the bishop. And most of the buildings in this space are medieval. If you look back at the one with the scaffolding, a couple of things to point out. Firstly, it is a half-timbered building. Very briefly, just so you can get your bearings, this is Winchester Cathedral. Now, I have to say that from this perspective, it looks like a pretty modest building.
I want to live in a town. So cool.
Windows and looking at the style. This is what's called English perpendicular, that huge window with its very prominent vertical lines. Stained glass window, a bit difficult to see from this side, but very broken up. So that is medieval glass, but you would be very troubled to make out any shape or any design. In the English Civil War of the 1640s, the parliamentarian troops rode into the cathedral on horseback and smashed the whole lot. They were complete thugs, to be honest. The locals lovingly picked up all the glass, replaced it, but of course it was a jigsaw beyond anybody's comprehension.
We didn't have time to go into the Winchester Cathedral, but we will go into the next cathedral. The outside of Winchester Cathedral was absolutely fabulous. Once we left there, we took a 25-minute drive to Salisbury.
Thank you. So we say goodbye to King Alfred for a moment. I must reference that story about the cake, seeing as our one gentleman remembers it from school. The story goes that when his reign reached its lowest point, when he'd been defeated by the Vikings at the Battle of Chippenham, and all his forces vanished into the night, it looked as if the job was done and the Vikings would take England over. What Alfred did was he took refuge on an area of England very close to Welsh. So he took refuge there because even the Vikings found it difficult to find their way through the Somerset levels, and gradually began to rethink, regroup, decide whether or not he could summon up enough strength in himself and enough forces to make a comeback. And he had to take refuge in the hut of an elderly lady who lived right in the midst of this very mysterious part of England. She had no idea who he was. And one day she charged him with looking after cooking her cakes on the open fire while she went off fishing. And Alfred, deep in thought, completely forgot the job he was given. The cakes burnt, and when the old lady returned, she admonished him, little realising that she was talking to her king.
As we're making our way to Salisbury, there was a road closure, and we got to see Stonehenge.
They thought it was a temple of the Druids. Now we know it's much, much older, and the Druids had nothing to do with its building. Instead, the first building at Stonehenge took place 5,000 years ago, round about 3000 BC, during a period that we call Neolithic, which means New Stone Age. Speed aircraft before the Second World War and transferred those ideas directly to the design of the Spitfire. So it's on our left now. Very small single-seater fighter.
Next, we explored Old Sarum, which is a historic site with ancient ruins and rich history.
Of artists. The point about here is that this is a natural defensive site. We've established that it's a lump of chalk before mankind did anything to it. We know that man has used this hill for more than 5,000 years, so the archaeology goes right into prehistory. The banks and the ditches were started by these Iron Age tribespeople. For them, we're talking about 2,500 years ago. These were the Celtic tribes who knew how to smelt iron. These were the people defeated by the Romans when they arrived. And they were pretty sort of warlike lot. They were always squabbling with one another. So it was not untypical for them to have their towns and villages on a hill with defences all around. The Normans came, they said, job done. We put our castle, and we're just above the castle site here. These remains are part of what was one of the great Norman castles of England.
So this is the site of the royal castle in the original Salisbury Cathedral before being largely abandoned in the 13th century when the new cathedral was built in the nearby valley.
There would have been a drawbridge, so you could lift up the drawbridge to prevent your enemy getting to your gate easily. There were portcullises. There were what were called murder holes, which if you imagine walking into a gate with a room above and there being holes immediately above your head as you're trying to peek down the gates. Them up there would be dropping all sorts of very unpleasant things on you. It's generally thought that it wasn't hot oil. That was far too expensive. It would be urine, which is equally unpleasant and equally harmful. So yeah, it's not a good place to attack. Why did William come here? Well, if we remember, he won the Battle of Hastings. Target number one was Winchester. Winchester is 20 to the point in the late 1100s that the bishop decided we need to move. So he wrote to the Pope saying, please can I have permission to move the cathedral? At that point, the King of England was a man called John, King John. Remember Disney, Robin Hood, all of that one. And if you've watched Game of Thrones, I reckon the inspiration comes from King John. He was wild, he was a really evil man. And he caused so much trouble, politically, socially, in all sorts of ways, that we were excommunicated as a country by the Pope. So if you had a child, you couldn't christen it. If you wanted to get married, it couldn't happen. If you had a body to bury, you couldn't do a proper funeral for more than 10 years. So no permission.
We head to Salisbury to grab a bite to eat, which was of course the local cuisine. We wandered the town, and then we got to see Salisbury Cathedral. The cathedral was simply amazing. The cathedral was completed in 1258 and is renowned for its stunning early English Gothic architecture. It boasts the tallest church spire in the United Kingdom at 404 feet. It also houses one of the best preserved copies of the Magna Carta
It's made of freshwater snails.
and a historical medieval clock dating back to 1386. The water feature in the center was installed in 2008 to mark the 750th anniversary.
We are built on water here. Can you imagine? We are a bit like a waterbed. When this cathedral was built in 1220, they didn't worry about climate change or anything like that. The thing was, the church owned this land and therefore they built their cathedral here. In Salisbury, we have the River Avon, and 5 other rivers feed into the River Avon. So we do have a lot of water. We have to be careful about how deep our water is under the cathedral. If it gets too high, because the water is running underneath, if it gets too high, our electrics are under here, and you can imagine what would happen then. If it gets too low, then the whole cathedral will crack and fall down. But we have a very good water board who are very helpful and will help us out if we have any problems. They will either stop a stream coming in or they'll add another one. What I will do now is dip it. This is all calibrated all the way down, and we'll see how much water there is down there. I'm down at the bottom. Where my thumb is, it's gone down since last week. But we're not at danger level. Danger level is down here. When we have to get onto the water board to let some water underneath. But if there is a flood, we have had it up here. Now the last flood we had, which was about down here I think, was in 1915. And it wasn't too bad. People could use water, Wellington boots or something. But the last big flood was in the 16th century when the priests had to come into the cathedral on horseback because it was too deep to walk. So they came on horseback. Good thing they could ride horses, I suppose, but there you are. So we do have to watch this, and believe you me, it's watched very closely. So we are built on water here. If you like, we're walking on water. You're all walking on water. All right.
In the roof, and any work to be done to the spire, they take the materials up through that hole. What he did was send a little lad up 404 foot with a very long 400 foot length plumb line that they dropped right the way down, and beneath this stand here is still the oil bath that the plumb line then sat in to keep it steady, and he was then able to do the measurements that gave him 29.5 inches. But he then looked at what the medieval masons had done, and he found ironwork up in the spire that he thought was great. If you look in the triforium here, can you see the hidden flying buttress that's basically pushing against the tower? And then they added this archway here, and if you look at the style of it, it doesn't match the rest of the cathedral. That's later, that acts as a brace.
While we were there, a wedding took place.
If you look down slightly from that, you'll see another row of faces. Any guesses as to who those people were? They were the masons, the people who built the cathedral.
We're now headed off to view the Magna Carta. It is one of 4 originals left in the world. The Magna Carta was signed in 1215 by King John of England, which was a groundbreaking document that limited the powers of the monarchy and established certain legal protections for the subjects, including the right to a fair trial. It laid the foundation for modern constitutional law and influenced democratic principles worldwide. The stained glass windows in here were simply amazing. I know I keep saying the word amazing, but it's amazing. Time to start heading back to the ship. And we get a history lesson about the Mayflower.
The point being that the Pilgrim Fathers who sailed the Atlantic Ocean in the autumn of 1620 are normally associated with Plymouth, and of course Plymouth Rock on the east coast of the States is linked with. But the fact is that in 1620 the Mayflower was waiting in Southampton for the Pilgrim Fathers to join the ship. She was a ship that was run by a merchant venturers company from London. So but also offer the merchant venturers companies that own ships a deal. And the deal was that once you've landed in the Americas, you will then supply us with a certain number of things like beaver skins that we can bring back high value on the London market, and that will make it good for us as a commercial venture. In fact, there was another ship involved as well called the Speedwell. The Pilgrim Fathers, most of them came from the Netherlands, not from England at this stage. They'd already left England and emigrated to Leiden in the Netherlands, where they lived for about 10 years. And the Netherlands, then as now, much more liberal. They allowed people largely to worship in the way that they felt best for them. But there came a time after about 10 years when the Pilgrim Fathers felt that perhaps the Dutch way of life was a bit too liberal, and they really didn't want their children growing up in that atmosphere anymore, so they thought now is the time to cross the Atlantic. So they met the Mayflower and the Speedwell here in Southampton, and really the voyage as it began was intended to head straight across the Atlantic with no further stops along the English coast. The problem was that the Speedwell was not fit for the journey. She was leaky, she was not seaworthy, and so there were several occasions when both ships had to call in at ports further down the coast in order to repair the Speedwell. They stopped off at a place called Dartmouth, and then they went into Plymouth. They spent several weeks in both places, so Plymouth is very much associated with them actually coming on shore and spending 3 weeks living there, including in what is now the gin distillery. And by the time they actually set sail across the Atlantic, it was rather late. It was late in the autumn. And remember what I said earlier about people invading these islands. Once you get to October, it's too late. Well, they left in September, and it meant their 3-month journey across the Atlantic. By the time they got to the east coast of the Americas, the weather was such that making a substantial settlement was impossible. So, and by that time, they'd given up on the Speedwell. They left her in Plymouth. So they all had to bundle together onto one ship, crammed into the hold of one ship for that long journey, and then spent most of the first winter living on board ship as well, because it was too late in the season. For the merchant venturers, this was really disappointing, because their business model was based on getting the Mayflower back to London straight away. So they were busy losing money. And that put pressure on the whole enterprise as well. So it didn't get off to a particularly ostentatious start, but of course, as history tells us, they did manage, they did stay, and gradually the settlement got a good footing and became seminal to the story of the United States.
Make sure to like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more adventures from every corner of the globe. Here's our itinerary for the next 4 ports. See you at the next port.